Everybody, welcome to part 2 of our interview with progressive champion Tulsi Gabbard. What really excites me about you as a politician are two things. The first thing I want to talk to you, because it is 9/11.
Yeah.
What is I like that you have been calling for sanity in our foreign policy, right? And because our foreign policy now is just it's regime change, and we're still in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Some 17 years later, no one knows what the goal is, and we're controlling less and less of the country. So I just want to let's just start off by saying how do you on 9/11? You're a veteran. How do you experience 9/11?
That's a heavy question. You know, there are thousands of men and women all across this country, like myself, who joined the military after the attacks on 9/11 to go after those terrorists who attacked us. And to think about how many lives have been lost since, how many American lives, how many first responders' lives were lost on 9/11 and since, and those who still suffer from major health problems because of their responding to that attack, their families, veterans who come home and suffer from visible and invisible wounds, and every single American taxpayer who have had trillions of dollars taken out of their wallets to pay for these interventionist wars that our country has waged since 9/11, looking at and understanding in a very personal way the cost of war. It is a true betrayal to all those who have sacrificed so much to now sit here on the anniversary of 9/11 and hear from our country's president and his administration about how they are essentially ready to wage war against Syria and Russia in order to stop them from attacking Al-Qaeda in Idlib, in Syria. We are in this situation today because of U.S. policies in Syria specifically, as we're talking about this situation where you have 20 to 30,000 Al-Qaeda and other jihadist terrorists who are in control of this city. There are a lot of civilians there, and Trump is now talking about going to war with these countries, with Syria and Russia, if they launch this attack that they've been talking about doing against those terrorists in Idlib. And he claims to be doing it to save Syrian civilians. However, if that were the case, then why was he not then the first to stand up and support the UN's call for humanitarian corridor for civilians to evacuate from the city? Why was he not the first one calling for an actual solution to help reduce the amount of Syrian civilian casualties? And so this looking for an excuse that the Trump administration is doing, they're looking for an excuse to basically launch an attack against Syria and Russia. And my concern is I think they're doing it for two reasons. One is because if you look back over the last couple of years, the two times that President Trump has received vast positive reinforcement from the mainstream media, from Democratic leaders, from Republican leaders, have been the two times that he's launched military attacks against Syria. His poll numbers are dropping. So he's looking with the political calculation of what's the thing that I know will make it so people are saying nice things about me again. That's the first reason. And the second reason is because there has been this long, slow regime change war happening in Syria. We've been waging this long war since 2011. And the main ground force in that war has been Al-Qaeda and these other jihadist terrorist groups. And so there have been both direct and indirect support of these groups fighting on the ground to overthrow this regime. And so they're concerned that if these terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda are taken out in Idlib, what happens to the ground force fighting to overthrow the Syrian government? And this leads us to the United States alliance with Saudi Arabia, who would like to see a Wahhabi extremist government replace the government that's in Syria. This leads to the United States alliance with Saudi Arabia and the atrocities that are occurring in Yemen. So when you look at what's happening and the fact that Al-Qaeda is stronger today than ever before, it is a true disservice, a betrayal, and dishonoring the sacrifices that have been made by so many people, by every American.
So, two questions on that. Why does Saudi Arabia want to overthrow Assad? Okay, that would be my first question.
Because he's not their puppet. They want someone that they can control.
Okay, and Syria is aligned with Iran, which is aligned with Russia. So there's lots of interests in getting rid of Assad, from Israel to Saudi Arabia. There's a pipeline. There's competing pipelines to bring natural gas to Europe. Now, Russia sells most of their natural gas to Europe, so they don't want that pipeline, which gives them... So they're not going to give up on this, right? So if Trump does start a war, it'll be a real war. Like, that, I don't think that's what people realize.
World War III type proportions.
Yes. So people don't really realize that that's what's happening and that's what's at risk right now. Everyone thinks that that'll never happen because it never happened before.
Yeah.
But I just want to show really quickly, you tweeted this out today. You said, while President Trump and VP Pence give 9/11 speeches about how much they care about the victims of al-Qaeda's attack on our country, they are simultaneously acting as protectors of al-Qaeda in Syria, Idlib, threatening Russia and Syria that if they attack al-Qaeda, we will punish them. So, that's just a plain fact that's true if anybody just takes an objective look at the situation. But you get pilloried for saying things like this all the time. Like, for instance, when you were skeptical of the gas attacks in Syria, when you were rightly skeptical, turns out Robert Fisk has confirmed that those gas attacks weren't what they were said to be. Mm-hmm. And that didn't make any sense that he would do that. He's winning the war. Lots of British ex-foreign ministers and the head of their Navy had said the same thing. This doesn't make any sense. We need to see evidence. Well, when you asked for evidence, people like Narratan said, people of Hawaii's 2nd District, was it not enough for you that your representative met with a murderous dictator? Will this move you? And it's you saying you're skeptical of the claims that Assad used. So, and then just piggybacking on that, former DNC chair Howard Dean said this is a disgrace. Gabbard should not be in Congress. Now, that's kind of super ironic because Howard Dean made his bones going against the Iraq War. In fact, when he was campaigning in 2004, he would start off his campaign speeches by saying, I'm from the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. And then they smeared him because he was against a war, just like they're smearing you, just like that. Like somehow you're in bed with a murderous dictator. And that's the head of the Center for American Progress, which was started by the Podestas. So, what is in it for someone like Narratan to smear you for asking for evidence about Syria?
I don't know. Maybe you should have her on your show sometime and
she blocked me on Twitter. By the way, I would have her on.
Let me just point out real quick.
No one would watch.
She's talking about the people of Hawaii's 2nd District, and I am truly grateful and honored to have just been reelected in our primary election in August by 84% of Hawaii's 2nd District in a race where I was challenged by 2 different people, one of whom was endorsed by the National Education Association as well as our Hawaii State Teachers Association, because she disagreed with my anti-regime change war foreign policy and my strong advocacy, particularly in Syria. And so to have that kind of overwhelming statement of support by the people of Hawaii that they are seeing through these critics and the arguments that they're making, and instead taking a stand for peace, understanding the cost of war, I think is something that I'm very grateful for. But I think it also shows that people are smarter, voters are smarter than some folks give them credit for.
Well, it's just, I still just scratch my head, like what's at Neera Tanden, who was behind the Iraq war, she's for Libyan war, now she wants more war in Syria. You can never be discredited in American politics if you're pro-war, no matter how many times you're wrong about it. And yet she wants more war, and she's smearing a veteran. You're a veteran. She's the head of a think tank. Why would she, which is, nothing. That's like, being born, that's like being born Chelsea Clinton. You're not really earning. My point is, what would be in it for the head of a think tank to be so hard against a veteran and so pro-war in another country after she just backed, if she cares about people's lives, or, in the United States supports 73% of the world's dictators, right? Saudi Arabia is, and here we are trying to pretend. So this is just because, so I think this is a bigger thing. I think this is because you're against money in politics.
That's true.
And they're for money in politics. They're all about money in politics. They're about corrupting politics. They're not about helping people or responding to the electorate or even serving the people who vote for their representatives. They're all about keeping money flowing in politics. They don't, and neoliberalism, right?
Right. And that's why it's so important for people to actually look at what individuals, whether people are running for office or they're in office or they're leaders in politics, what do they actually stand for? Because you have these individuals and groups of people who call themselves progressive, but are some of the first to call for more war in the guise of humanitarianism. That look at these poor people suffering, and there are people suffering in other parts of the world. Let's go drop more bombs and try to take away their suffering. And when you look at example after example after example, our actions, U.S. policy, interventionist, regime change war policies have made the lives of people in these other countries far worse off than they ever were before or would have been if we had just stayed out of it. So what that really comes down to is people with a great deal of power in the United States to make these decisions, taking devastating actions really to make themselves feel better, because then they can say, well, we did something, without ever actually looking through before taking that action, say, what will the consequences of this be? First set of consequences, the second set of consequences, all these different ripple effects that we've seen play out in places like Iraq, in places like Libya, where today, after we led the war to topple Gaddafi, we have open human slave trading going on in the open market. In today's society, we have more terrorists in Libya today than there ever were before. We essentially have a failed state, and we see much of these detrimental, devastating effects also in Syria.
So you think the United States would get tired of these wars, but we're not. We're in Afghanistan 17 years, right? We're still in Iraq. We're still in doing stuff in Libya. We're trying to get it. Well, Trump announced we're never going to leave Syria. We're in Africa. We have 7,500 troops in Africa that we know of. Mm-hmm. We have officially somewhere around 900 military bases around the world, unofficially over 1,000 because lots of them are secret. Russia has 8. So when did we break through the war machine's propaganda? I mean, people are against war in America, right? So a lot of people voted for Trump because he said he was going to be a non-interventionist. Right. And a lot of people on the left want the foreign policy you're talking about, a rational, evidence-based foreign policy, right? And not to do regime change wars for any reason except our own security and safety, right? And the proof that all these wars, for me, the proof that all these wars are, some people say they're bankers' wars, some people say they're oil wars, it's always a money. It's always about a handful of people figure out they can make money, and so we go to war, right? So, Colin Powell's chief of staff admitted that both the Iraq wars were over oil, right? So that's Colonel Wilkerson. So he figured that out, that these are about oil. When do you think we get tired of these wars? And because we're ending our empire, ironically, the same way all empires end. We're overextending ourselves militarily. We have a $16 billion the Pentagon budget, which is 40% higher than at the height of the Iraq War in 2005. We now increased our Pentagon budget 40%. Did we increase our education budget 40%? Did we increase our infrastructure spending? No, nothing. And nobody gets to there's no debate over that. It just happens. So how do we do this? How can we pull this off before our empire ends? I think it might be too late. But can we do something about it?
It's not too late.
Really?
We have to do something about it. Failure is not an option here. And more people are becoming more educated, aware, and informed about these consequences of our actions. And I think fewer people are buying into those cheap arguments that are often made to sell a war to the American people. As you said, I mean, there's such a stark difference between the hawkish bipartisan environment in Washington and what I hear from people both in my home state of Hawaii as well as people from many other states in the country, people who span the political ideological spectrum from very progressive to very conservative and anywhere in between, people who stand in agreement with us about the need to end these interventionist, costly wars that have cost us trillions of dollars alone since 9/11, where we see the need of how that money could have been spent right here at home on things like education, on making sure that our kids in Flint and Detroit and Hawaii and New York City and many other places in the country have access to clean water, on building bridges and infrastructure. I mean, there are so many needs that we have in this country, and yet we have spent trillions of dollars on these interventionist wars. So that's where a lot of my frustration in the 2016 presidential debate happened, because, you know, when I was pushing, saying, hey, bring up more of these foreign policy questions, oftentimes it was kind of brushed off by saying, oh, yeah, that's just one issue, but there are so many other issues, ignoring the fact that as long as we continue to spend these trillions of dollars, this issue is on these interventionist wars. This issue of the cost of war is central to every single other domestic issue that we have to deal with as a country, because we can't afford to do both. We have a finite amount of resources. And so I think the more people are paying attention, I think more people are now, thanks to shows like yours and others and social media. I think there's access to more information than just what they're getting through, you know, the 3 cable network news channels. And again, I think we saw a lot of excitement around these issues in the 2016 election. And so we need to keep this going.
Okay, well.
And that's why it's important today, on days like 9/11.
Yeah.
To not only honor those who have sacrificed and not only honor those who have been killed, but to point out the current state of affairs and the hypocrisy that exists within the top tiers of our government.
Boy, it's just, I appreciate your optimism about ending the wars. We have 2 pro-war parties. I mean, the Democratic Party is pro-war. There's no doubt about it. And let me just show you this really quickly before we get into. I wanted to show you. This is John Kerry. So here he was at a congressional hearing, and he was letting people know. So people don't know what these wars are about.
Right.
They don't understand about the petrodollar. They don't understand why are we in bed with Saudi Arabia, which is a brutal theocratic dictatorship, and we're against like somebody like Iran, who actually has elections. Not that they're perfect or great or anything. Like, why people don't question, like, why is that? And people don't. Well, why do we do all these wars we're doing them at the behest of Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, when we went off the gold standard, we went on the petrodollar, which is now, so when Saudi Arabia sells oil, you have to buy it in the American dollars. So that's a big deal. And what we offered them in exchange for that is that they could use our military wherever they wanted. And you think I'm kidding? Here's John Kerry talking about Saudi Arabia offering to pay for us to go overthrow Assad. Here it is.
To respect to Arab countries offering to bear cost and to assist, the answer is profoundly yes, they have. That offer is on the table.
So he says the countries have offered to bear the cost. That offer's on the table, and the Congresswoman asked them to be a little bit more clear, and here we go.
Secretary, and the details on the offer and the proposal on the table, what are the figures that we're talking about?
Well, we don't know what action we're engaged in right now, but they've been quite significant. I mean, very significant. In fact, some of them have said that if the United States is prepared to go do the whole thing the way we've done it previously in other places, they'll carry that cost. That's how dedicated they are to this.
Jeez.
So there's John Kerry, a guy who became famous standing up against a bullshit war. Now he is trying to sell us bullshit wars. And he just admitted in public that Saudi Arabia is willing to bear the cost of us to overthrow Assad in Syria, just like we've done previously. Just like we did in Iraq the first time, just like we did in Iraq the second time. I don't know how much they paid for Libya. So people aren't aware of this, are they? Do you think people are aware that Saudi Arabia is making offers and funding our interventionist wars?
Most people aren't. Most people aren't, and that's the shady secret that people don't talk about in Washington.
Why don't
not only are they paying for these wars and using our sons and daughters' lives to carry out their bidding, but they're also paying a lot of these think tanks in Washington a ton of money to issue opinions and ideas and plans and proposals that jive with their agenda.
So when you say they, you mean the military-industrial complex?
They meaning Saudi Arabia.
Oh, Saudi Arabia.
And the military-industrial complex. But in this specific instance of how Saudi Arabia is using their money to achieve their own objectives at the sacrifice of our own well-being.
Wow, I thought it was Russia that was interfering in the affairs of the United States. Turns out there's other countries doing it, like Saudi Arabia. That is so weird to hear that. I didn't know that. So you've introduced lots of great legislation. You introduced legislation called Stop Arming Terrorists Now Act, or Funding Terrorists Now?
Stop Arming Terrorists Act.
How many votes did that get?
Hasn't gotten a vote. Hasn't gotten a hearing in committee.
People don't, I bring this up when I go on other people's podcasts, that you introduced this legislation, and they say, why? I said, because we're funding terrorists, and people look at me like I'm crazy.
Yeah.
So how is the United States funding? I mean, I just showed you the John Kerry video, but tell me, how is the United States government funding terrorism?
Specifically in Syria, now since 2011, both overtly and covertly, the United States has been providing arms, intelligence, and equipment to fighters who are allied with, fighting alongside, working with Al-Qaeda in this regime change war. So these very same terrorists who attacked us on 9/11, we have been supporting for years as this ground force to fight in this regime change war that we have quietly been waging now for 7 years. This has been well documented. I have been met with that quizzical, puzzled look from people on kind of the mainstream cable news shows who've asked, like, how that's illegal. Yeah, it is. But the fact that we've got to introduce legislation that states exactly that not a single U.S. taxpayer dollar will be used to provide any type of support to these terrorist groups or to those countries like Saudi Arabia, who support these terrorist groups. Whether it's direct or indirect, we cannot allow taxpayer dollars to be used in this way, as they have been.
Thanks for watching. Please make sure you're subscribed. Even if you think you are, you're probably not. It only takes a second to check, and then you have to ring that bell so they send you a notification when we drop a new video. Otherwise, they won't tell you when we drop new videos. And if you like our show, please help support it. Become a patron. We give you hours of bonus material every week, and we give a live stream. We do a live stream every Saturday at 2 p.m. Pacific time when you could ask us questions and we answer them back. Thanks for your support.